Welcome. Today, we're diving into a really powerful series of verses from Surah Al-Baqarah. We're going to follow this remarkable journey that starts by defining the very essence of righteousness and then shows us how that core principle gets applied to law, to personal discipline, and even to our direct relationship with God. So, here's how we'll break it down. We're going to cover 4 key themes. First, we'll look at the Qur'an's comprehensive definition of righteousness. Then we'll see how that informs laws of justice. After that, we'll examine the spiritual discipline of fasting. And finally, we'll conclude with these beautiful verses about God's closeness to the believer. Okay, let's jump right in. So, we begin with the foundation. How does the Qur'an actually establish the core principles of a pious life, moving beyond, just mere outward rituals, to something much, much deeper? What the Qur'an is saying here is that this book has been sent down with guidance that's so clear and definitive, there's just no ambiguity left between truth and falsehood or what's lawful and unlawful. So because of that, those who choose to differ with it have gone so far in their opposition that they've kind of lost sight of their own well-being and haven't left any room for themselves to turn back. So this whole context, right, where people were getting lost in arguments over details, it really sets the stage for a crucial question. If piety isn't just about external forms, then what is true righteousness? Well, the Qur'an introduces this key term, al-birr, and this is a really powerful concept. It means to fulfill one's rights and obligations completely. This covers everything, the rights that are just inherent to our existence, like our duties to God, to our parents, to all of humanity, and also the duties that come up from the promises and covenants we make. It's this comprehensive idea of faithfulness in every single aspect of life. Now, what's so interesting here is how this verse breaks down al-birr into belief, action, and character. It all starts with sincere belief in God without any partners, in a day of judgment where we're all accountable, in the angels who deliver guidance, in the divine books as the standard for truth, and in the prophets as our guides. But, faith has to translate into action. And notice the emphasis on spending wealth despite love for it. It's about giving what you cherish, prioritizing relatives first, then orphans, the needy, travelers, those who have to ask, and those in bondage. This is then formalized by upholding prayer and the prescribed charity, zakat. And finally, and this is so crucial, it all comes down to character. The verse specifically points to those who fulfill their covenants and are patient in poverty, in illness, and in times of conflict. These are the ones the Qur'an says who are truly sincere and truly pious. Okay, so let's see how this foundation then builds into law. From that profound definition of righteousness, the Qur'an transitions to its practical application in society, establishing laws that really balance justice with mercy. The central legal principle we're talking about here is qisas. The root of the word literally means to follow in the footsteps of another. So as a legal term, it refers to applying a just and equal punishment, essentially treating the offender in the same way they treated their victim. So the law of qisas establishes absolute equality. A life for a life, no matter someone's social status. This was meant to put an end to those pre-Islamic customs where the powerful were treated differently, and that's the state's duty. But right alongside this strict justice, there is a path of mercy. The family of the victim is given the right to forgive the perpetrator and accept compensation or blood money instead. And this is a profound wisdom because it can completely extinguish that desire for revenge and become a direct act of grace that can heal deep societal wounds. The verse even instructs that this compensation should be determined by social custom and paid with excellence, as a sign of gratitude for the mercy that's been shown. And this verse brilliantly illustrates the ultimate purpose. The Qur'an says, in retribution there is life. How could that be? Well, it's not about the life of just one individual, but the life of the entire society. When just retribution is applied, it acts as a powerful deterrent. It prevents more violence, and by doing so, it preserves countless lives. You can think of society like a body. Sometimes a diseased part has to be removed to save the whole. This is that life-giving wisdom within the law of qisas. Following this theme of justice in society, the Qur'an then addresses how wealth is distributed after death. It establishes an obligation for anyone leaving behind wealth to make up a quest, a wasiyah, for their parents and close relatives. This was a really crucial interim step to make sure there was fairness, preparing society for the very detailed laws of inheritance that would be revealed later. And the verse warns very sternly against altering a will, but it provides an exception. If someone fears partiality or injustice, they are actually permitted to mediate between the heirs to reach a fair settlement, not to change it on their own, but to mediate. Okay. So now we're going to shift gears a bit. We're moving from these societal laws to a deeply personal spiritual discipline. Let's look at fasting as a path to cultivating that very piety we talked about at the beginning.
The term used here is asiyam. It's understood as abstaining from food, drink, and marital relations purely for God's pleasure. Really, at its core, fasting is a symbolic, physical expression of profound obedience to God.
So, the crucial question is, why fast? The verse gives us the answer directly, so that you may achieve taqwa. You see, to abide by God's limits in life, a person has to be able to control their inner desires and impulses. Fasting is the primary training ground for developing this self-restraint, which is the very essence of taqwa, or God consciousness. What's interesting is that the verses also show us a progression in the ruling. At first, for those who found fasting very difficult, there was an option to pay a ransom, a fidya, by feeding a person in need for each missed day, though the verse made it clear that fasting was still better. But later, this option was abrogated for those who were able to fast. It then became obligatory to make up the exact number of missed days. This gradual approach gave the community time to get accustomed to the discipline, while the exemptions for sickness and travel remained, as a sign of God's mercy.
And why was the month of Ramadan chosen for this specific act of worship? Well, because this is the month in which humanity received its greatest gift, the Qur'an itself. So the fast is an act of gratitude for this divine guidance. I mean, think about it. When you abstain from even lawful things for God's sake, you are declaring with your entire being that God and His commands are greater than anything else. That is the ultimate expression of thanks.
So after talking about law and discipline, the tone here just completely shifts. It becomes incredibly personal, really intimate. This final section focuses on that direct, unmediated relationship between the believer and God. This is one of the most powerful and direct statements in the Qur'an. You have to imagine, in the context of the verses being revealed, I am near was an immediate reality. It was such an encouragement for the believers. Your prophet is among you, and through him you have a direct line to my guidance. Ask your questions, understand the path. And the verse goes on to describe this beautiful reciprocal relationship. God says, I answer the call of the caller when he calls upon me. At that time, this especially referred to the immediate answers they received through revelation. And then the verse continues, so let them respond to me. Since God is so near and so responsive, the believer's part is to respond with sincere obedience and unwavering faith so that they may stay firmly on the right path.
Building on that theme of God answering questions, this verse gives us a very practical clarification. Some of the early Muslims, maybe influenced by other traditions, were putting this extra hardship on themselves, assuming marital relations were forbidden for the entire month of Ramadan. This verse clarifies that no, intimacy is perfectly permissible during the nights of the fast. It also defines the time to stop eating, as that moment dawn is clearly distinguishable, which removes any ambiguity.
However, there is one exception. The verse mentions itikaf, which is the spiritual practice of secluding oneself in a mosque for devotion. Because the entire purpose of itikaf is complete focus and turning towards God, marital relations are prohibited during this period, just to maintain that singular devotion. And this brings our whole journey full circle. The section concludes by stating, these are the limits of Allah, so don't approach them. It's a call to maintain a safe distance from what is forbidden, so you don't accidentally transgress. And the final purpose stated is the exact same one we began with. Allah makes His verses this clear so that people may achieve taqwa, or true piety. The ultimate goal of all these laws, all these disciplines, and all this guidance is to help us build a righteous character, conscious and mindful of God. So it leaves us with a thought, doesn't it? What does it truly mean to live a life not just within the limits, but by consciously keeping a safe and respectful distance from them?